So if you've been following me for a while, you may have heard me reference or mention Cotard's delusion. This is a rare mental disorder that I used to suffer from, that I developed around the age of sort of 16, 17, and I suffered with it until I was probably about 21, 22. Cotard's delusion is not something that I've really gone into depth about before, simply because that when you've suffered this kind of mental disorder, it never really leaves you. This is a delusion that was my life for quite a few years, a very dark time in my life, very, very challenging. And it's not really something that I've ever really wanted to go back into in too much detail or think too much on. When you spend years believing a total delusion about your whole life, that idea is quite hard to be totally free from. So when I used to suffer with Cotard's delusion, I basically thought that I was already dead, that my life was a dream, that none of this was real. I was aware that apparently when you die, you have 7 minutes of brain activity, so that you're dead, but your brain continues for another 7 minutes. And I had convinced myself that my real body was dying in a car crash, and that this dream that I was in, this life, was a construction of my last 7 minutes of brain activity. So if you think of the movie Inception, or even just dreams in general, where, time is very, very different, where in those 7 minutes of brain activity, it's quite possible that your brain could produce the whole rest of your life. And so I would wake up every day believing this, and the only way I dealt with it was to be high all the time. Anytime that I was sober, I was just focusing on it more, dwelling on it more, thinking on it more. And this kind of delusion is like a giant maze, a giant labyrinth, where every path you walk down, you think you might be able to disprove the delusion, but actually it only reinforces it. You find another dead end, and then you're kind of back to where you started, realizing now that the maze and the labyrinth is even bigger and there's even less chance of escape. So whilst I was suffering with this delusion, I wasn't aware that it was sort of a diagnosed condition. I had ended up having to deal with doctors and having medications, and several occasions doctors wanted to put me on a mental ward in a mental hospital, but they were not totally aware of the depth of my delusion, because I would never admit this part to them, simply because I had already decided in my mind, in the delusion, that everyone who I interact with is a part of the dream. Everyone that I interact with is my subconscious, and that if I tried to have this conversation with anyone, my subconscious would just try to reinforce the fact that this is real. The whole point of my subconscious in this dream would be to make me believe in the dream reality, to never think that it wasn't real. So it took me a long time before I actually admitted that part to anyone. And when I did, the doctor didn't label it, or don't think they'd even heard of it before. They just wanted to put me on a mental section in a mental hospital. And I was very fortunate, because every time my dad would step in and say, no, we'll keep him at home, which I think was really what saved me, because, if I had been in that kind of environment, I no doubt would have probably ended up a lot worse. But I really learned in that period of time how whatever is going on inside of your head, you really attract it. Because, for example, I remember there was one night I'd been at work and I was walking home and I was having a really bad day. Like, I was really stuck in it. I was really lost in it, trapped in the delusion and really reinforcing it. And I thought to myself how nobody will ever have a conversation like this with me, because then that would be my subconscious bringing my attention to something that it shouldn't be bringing its attention to. And then it was literally the next day that I was hanging out with a friend. We were just sat there watching a movie, not doing anything, not speaking, when out of the blue they just turn to me and they say, what if we're already dead? And obviously that just sent me spiraling, because now suddenly it's like, right, my subconscious is listening to my thoughts, and now it's making me have this conversation because it knows that I think it would never make me have this conversation with it. So now it's having that conversation with me to make me not think that it's my subconscious. And it's one of those things that you can go round and round in circles with it, and it's always just going to prove itself even further. And so because I was always high all the time and self-medicating with whatever I could, I was a very different person back then. I mean, I barely spoke. I was actually very, very quiet, to the point that I would never say more than just a few words. I had terrible anxiety. I remember when I was coming out of my delusion, I was trying to speak properly again and trying to string a sentence together with just more than like 3 or 4 words was a great challenge. I mean, one time I went to a job interview and I was struggling so much. And I remember I said this sentence where I got all the words in the sentence jumbled up. So I just spoke gibberish. And I have no idea what those people must have been thinking with me sat there in front of them, just clearly struggling. And so someone asked me, did I think that all my family were also dead, or that everyone else was also dead? So no, it's not that I thought everyone else was dead. I believed that everybody was me, that everyone was a part of my subconscious and was simply there to make me believe in the reality. So nobody in my life was real. Everybody around me was just a figment of my imagination, and that I didn't really exist to them and they didn't really exist to me. And I had another question. Someone asked me if I managed to stay grounded during this time. So I was totally ungrounded. Like again, I was always high. I was always trying to medicate myself to try and just get through every single day without losing myself further in the delusion and suffering from it even more. Suicide was a constant contemplation, because it's like, well, if I kill myself, then that will get me free of it. But then it was like, well, no, obviously not, because I'm already dying. This is my brain. You can't kill yourself in a dream. You'll just wake up in another dream. So I was totally not grounded at all. I was trapped in my head. I was trapped in delusion. I wasn't here at all for those few years, really. And it's funny because a lot of people, I think nearly everyone, had no idea. Everyone around those years would have just thought that I'm this quiet person, that this is how he is, and they had no idea that actually I didn't even believe that they were real, how I didn't believe that this was real. And it took a lot of work to free myself from that delusion, to find a way out, because you can't think yourself out of that. The problem is created by your thoughts in the first place. And thinking about it, or trying to think your way out of it, is just throwing more petrol onto the fire. And so the only way out of it was to remove the power that those ideas and those thoughts had over me, which obviously is why I got into teaching meditation and yoga in the first place. So that is Cotard's delusion. Most people haven't heard of it. Honestly, I wouldn't have heard anything about it unless I had suffered with it. The doctors never actually named it or labeled it. It wasn't until sort of years down the line that I just came across an article about someone on the internet, and it was someone who had committed suicide because they were suffering with Cotard's delusion. And that's the first time I had heard the terminology, the name for it. And I was able to accept that that is a thing that people suffer at that point, because it no longer had any power over me. But if I had read that whilst in the delusion, whilst still struggling with it, I'm sure it would have probably, my mind would have found a way to make it a part of my delusion. It would have been something that just reinforces itself and makes it more real than less. So yeah, so that is something I used to really struggle with. So if there's any other questions, anything else about that anybody wants to know, please feel free to drop a comment or drop me a message. I'm aware that speaking about this has already made one person come forward and admit that they had sort of similar things. So yeah, just sharing this in case there's something here which may help somebody else.